Hello, everyone, and welcome to our ME Menstrual Equity 101 workshop. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, and we're super excited to be presenting this workshop to all of you. A big thank you to the Edith Lando Virtual Learning Center for having us. So I am Priya. Our other facilitator is Ms. Sun, who's there. We will introduce ourselves properly later, but just so you know who we are right off the bat. So a couple of housekeeping items before we do get started. There will be two interactive activities in this workshop. So we do recommend having a pen and paper or just something handy to take notes on. And menstrual health is a public health and human rights issue that affects women, girls, two-spirit, non-binary, trans, and intersex folks all around the world. We are happy to welcome all of you, whether you menstruate or not, to our workshop today in our endeavor to accelerate the achievement of menstrual equity. Before we jump into some introductions, we want to acknowledge the privilege that we have to be able to live, work, and benefit from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands that we currently reside on. We would love for everyone to take a minute to think about what being on the lands that you're on means to you. And to help you out with this, we encourage you to check out the website native-land.ca, which Quisan has put in the chat, to learn more about the land that you are situated on and its history. And you can just like enter your address or city or even scroll on their map if you're just curious about general things. And we hope this gives you a greater understanding of the challenges Indigenous peoples face as an experience as a result of genocide and colonialism, and an opportunity to reflect on what this land means to you as an individual, as well as thinking about colonial oppressions and genocides happening in many parts of the world currently. With that, I will let Quisan introduce herself.
Thanks, Priya. Hey everyone, my name is Kwisa and I use she, her pronouns. I'm joining you today from the traditional homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, colonially known as East Vancouver. I'm a program coordinator with Free Periods Canada, and I also work as a researcher in the field of sexual health education and sexualized violence prevention. And like Priya said, I'll be facilitating more in the second half, so I'll be in the chat during the first half. If you have any questions, I'll be keeping an eye on that.
Thank you, Quisan. I have already sort of introduced myself, but hello, I am Priya. I use pronouns she, they, alternating preferably. I am a non-binary, bilingual menstrual equity educator. Big title, I know. But I do lots of things here at FBC. Um, I am another program coordinator on the project, and I'm coming to you today from the homelands of the Mohawk and Haudenosaunee peoples, colonially known as Montreal, where it is cold. -20 level cold, but we're staying inside. Yeah, it's been cold. But I will be facilitating the first half of the presentation today, and then I'll be monitoring the chat for the second portion. So today's workshop is all about menstrual equity, and menstrual equity consists of a variety of intersecting factors. So we'll be learning a lot today and discussing many related concepts. At the end of the workshop, we hope that you will understand A, what period poverty is and the variety of impacts it has in Canada. We will also be discussing the role that education has in transforming the stigma and shame often associated with menstrual health. And by the end of the session, we hope that you'll have a clear idea of what period poverty and menstrual stigma are, what the differences between them are, and how they impact and interact with folks differently based on different factors. And lastly, we want you to walk away from this workshop with a boost in confidence in your ability to talk about menstrual equity, especially with populations that you work with. I did want to double check. Can everyone see the screen? I should have asked this when we started, but I forgot. Okay, perfect. Thank you. If for any reason there is a slide that isn't matching the words that one of us are saying, please just unmute, let us know, and we'll get it sorted out as soon as possible. So, next up, we're going to chat about some common myths surrounding menstruation that some of you might have heard or might not have heard. So, it's important that when we're talking about myths about menstruation, that we do keep in mind that some of these myths are significantly more present in other cultures and religions than others. So, number one, we have only women menstruate. Simply put, this is just not true. Not all women menstruate, and not all menstruators are women. And we will touch on this one further in the presentation. Number two, periods are an individual issue. Menstruators make up about half of the population, and not having access to proper education or products can likely lead to health problems. Number three, menstruation is impure. In certain cultures and religions, menstruators are viewed as impure while they are menstruating. During their periods, they are not allowed to enter temple or the kitchen. And menstruation is not something that needs to be cleaned or purified. It is just something that happens naturally. Number four, buying product should be kept hidden. This myth is one of the ways that period stigma continues to be perpetuated. There is nothing to be ashamed of when buying menstrual products. And number five, pain is normal. We will touch on this one later in the workshop as well. So we have introduced ourselves and started our sort of intro of the presentation, but we would love for all of you to introduce yourselves. So I'll go again just so we have a sort of template, but we're looking for name, pronouns, where you're joining us from, and if you were a season, what season would you be? So my name is Priya. I use pronouns she, they alternating, and I'm coming to you from Montreal. And if I was a season, I really think I'd be the spring. I just love flowers.
So I've introduced myself, but if I were a season, I would definitely be summer. Um, I don't want to just be like, oh, because I'm hot, but like I love the summer the most.
Okay, what I will say from the chat is we have some varied answers for the seasons, but I have yet to see a winter. And maybe that's okay because it is winter right now. So if you think about it like that, we have all the seasons with us. Okay, if anyone else wanted to share, feel free to pop it in the chat, but we will actually get into the presentation now. So we're going to start off with some definitions just to make sure we're all on the same page. It is totally okay if you are not familiar with these definitions because a globally recognized definition of menstrual health was only defined in 2021, which is still like not very long ago, right? And this definition was globally recognized when 51 stakeholders came together to define it. And it's grounded in the World Health Organization's definition of health and well-being. So we have it here quoted in the little box on screen, but menstrual health is defined as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity in relation to the menstrual cycle. Unfortunately, in so-called Canada, this definition of menstrual health, where there is complete physical, mental, and social well-being in relation to the menstrual cycle, does not match the lived reality for many people who menstruate. This is where period poverty and period stigma come in. So period poverty is the lack or absence of adequate menstruation supplies and education arising from financial hardships. Our immediate thoughts may go to product like pads or tampons, but in reality, this can also refer to period pain supplies or other cycle management supplies like Tylenol, heat packs, or even reliable transportation. Period stigma refers to the negative perception of menstruation and menstruators. So these two things will come and reinforce each other like a cycle, which is kind of what we're showing on the slide, where the lack of access to education or menstrual supplies can lead to the perpetuation of false ideologies and influence the experiences of menstruators. So what do we mean by this? Let's look at an example. So let's say there's a student named Alex, and Alex gets their period in class and doesn't have a tampon. So they have to ask their teacher for one. And the teacher looks around in their purse, reluctantly pulls one out, and whispers, "You know, Alex, your mom should make sure you always have one. This isn't something you should talk about outside your home." This leaves Alex feeling embarrassed, belittled, and ashamed. The next time Alex needs a tampon, out of fear of being shamed or alienated for having their period, they decide to wear the same one until they get home. They end up rationing their tampons because they only have 3 to 4 good ones for the entire month due to financial barriers. And because of their previous experiences being open about menstruation, they aren't as open about menstruation anymore and aren't aware of the potential risks that come with wearing the same tampon for longer than the recommended time. And they are too ashamed to access the free products provided by the school. This one encounter with their teacher leaves Alex with the understanding that periods are not something you talk about no matter the situation. And because of this, they avoid going out with friends, participating in extracurricular activities, and even missing school as they do not have access to necessary supplies and are too afraid to ask for help. Alex is a fictional character, but their story is the reality for many people in Canada. In Canada, 68% of people who menstruate have missed out on participating in school or social activities because of their periods, and 86% have gotten their period without access to immediate supplies. Something that we think is super important to mention is oftentimes these statistics will actively ignore or exclude trans menstruators. So trans as the label of non-binary, genderqueer, two-spirit, gender diverse, etc., from this research. So it is essential that we acknowledge this because these numbers are probably much larger if all menstruators or if all menstruators were included in these statistics or studies. There is still a lot of research to be done to determine how all menstruators, including trans or even disabled menstruators, are impacted by menstrual inequity. The main takeaway from this example is that we can't say that we have menstrual equity in Canada right now. To achieve menstrual equity, we would need access to appropriate information and education, access to period-related care, and to be able to experience a stigma-free environment and freedom to participate in activities however menstruators may choose to do so. Okay, but why do we see this? Why does menstrual stigma exist? And why do people struggle to access period products? So if we go back to our example with Alex, and we imagine that Alex had encountered anyone else that was more open to talking about menstruation and given out a tampon, they would probably feel more supported in learning about menstruation and wouldn't feel so shamed and ashamed for talking about it. Alex's views on menstruation would likely be very different based on the experiences that they could have had. So, a research study conducted by us, Free Periods Canada, tried to understand this. Why does menstrual inequity exist? So, we followed the patterns and underlying structures of menstruation and realized that menstrual inequity exists partially because of how we view, understand, and talk about it. And the only way that we can change that is through education. So I hope that as you take this information in, you will consider either teaching about menstruation or talking about menstruation in your work or other life areas if there's an opportunity to do so. And with that, I will pass the baton to Kwisan for the rest of the presentation.
Well, you will be making a guest appearance, but yes. Thanks, Priya. So yeah, we have kind of identified now the importance of education in combating menstrual inequity. But how do we actually practice this and how do we talk about menstrual health? So we'll be talking a little bit later about like the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, 3 or 4, depending who you ask. Um, But we've kind of made this four-step guide to go along with it to making menstrual health education more accessible, more inclusive, and also more fun and engaging. So, the four things we want to talk about in the next couple of minutes are language, intersectionality, changing the narrative, and management of the menstrual cycle. So, we were talking a little bit earlier about some of the myths we may have heard in relation to menstruation. And there are also a lot of puns that I'm sure people have heard about periods. So, for example, on the reg, time of month, and flow, the curse, things like that. But what we really encourage is to call a period a period. So, a big part of smashing period stigma is really encouraging people to call menstruation what it is. When we use terms like on the rag or the curse, it can bring up a lot of negative connotations associated with periods. Another example we like to highlight in relation to language is the term menstrual hygiene or sanitary products, which I'm sure many of you have seen in like grocery stores and such. So I don't know about you, but when I think about the word hygiene or sanitary, I really think about like cleaning something super dirty, scrubbing it, getting rid of it. Um, and so when we tag a word like that onto menstruation, or if we call menstrual supplies sanitary products, we're again reinforcing these negative stereotypes and connotations. You've also probably noticed throughout the presentation that we use the term menstruators instead of girls or women when we're talking about periods. And Priya mentioned this earlier, but this is because some trans, non-binary, two-spirit, and intersex folks menstruate as well. So again, just having a period doesn't make someone a woman, and similarly, not having a period doesn't make someone any less of a woman. Many people who have a uterus may also stop menstruating due to health conditions or stress or medications. So using gender inclusive language, it's a really simple but impactful step that we can take towards making everyone's menstrual experiences comfortable and also safer. Again, how do we practice this? How do we talk to youth about this? These are some examples that we like to use. So instead of feminine hygiene products, we can practice saying menstrual supplies or period supplies. Instead of women's health, we can talk about menstrual or reproductive health. And then instead of women and girls, again, we can say people who menstruate, people with periods. And this is just kind of a helpful chart, especially for youth or people who may not be as familiar in the menstruation space to be able to visualize these little changes. So, this importance of language really ties into the concept of intersectionality, and this is a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. So, the effects of period poverty are multifaceted and compounding, and they disproportionately impact certain populations, namely marginalized groups, based on the intersecting of particular social identities. So, for example, 34% of all Canadians have to regularly sacrifice something within their budget to afford menstrual products. Again, this stat is probably much higher and isn't properly reflected due to the exclusion of trans folks from such statistics. Also, in Canada, racialized people and 2S LGBTQIA plus people are more likely to experience economic poverty, and this compounds with period poverty. So if we look at the image on the screen, it represents some of the social determinants of health, and you can see some of the factors that might contribute to someone's experience with period poverty, whether this is a risk or a protective factor. It's a lot of words, so I'm going to pass it back to Priya for a quick exercise, and then we'll continue with the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Kwisa. So we are going to do an exercise that is going to show us a little bit more how period poverty can impact someone's life. So our little scenario for this activity is we are going to pretend that we are Mrs. Martinez and we are a seventh grade middle school teacher in a small town. It doesn't have to be Sudbury. Pick any small town that you would like. Totally up to you. So along with her partner, They have a 7-year-old and an 11-year-old, and they are looking to budget their finances so they can live comfortably as a family. Mrs. Martinez has a budget of 15 coins. This is our fake economy where everything is paid for in simple coin amounts. So you have 15 coins, and you will have to allocate these 15 coins into three different categories. Oh, okay, I'm gonna have to zoom out a little bit. I just like to zoom it. I need it in between. This, okay, 5% is what we're gonna do, I guess. So here are your three categories. You have food, housing, and transportation, and you will have to allocate 15 coins across these three. Each of the choices here are accompanied by an amount, and these are the amount. This is the cost. So this choice, for example, costs 3 coins, this one 5, etc. So I will give you all 2 minutes, I guess, 2, 3 minutes to kind of think, reflect, and then we'll come back and we can share and have a discussion about it.
I can jump in if no one wants to, or just while we're waiting for people to type in the chat as well. Um, I'm just like a classic girly. I am always fives across the board. I don't know like what that is. Sometimes I think about switching it up, but I like to keep a little bit of a medium ground. Um, I'm a sucker for a home cooked meal, so I think that plays into it. And then yeah, I've also never lived in a small town. I live in like very central Vancouver, so I might not also have that experience that would maybe make me make a different decision. But yeah, fives across the board.
I like it. I like it. I'm also a 5 across the board girly. I do enjoy some simple math. And I have decided to go rogue with my own activity and decide that we have great public transport here in Priya's version of Sudbury. So I am basing my answer on that. Did anyone else want to share how they allocated their coins? Maybe wanted to share how this activity made them feel? That's very fair, TS Pink. I like to throw a cog into my own activity and just go rogue to spice things up. But yeah, totally realistically, Sudbury probably doesn't have the public transport to accommodate for the full family. And even if it did, it would probably be at the cost of time. And when doing these budgeting things, I find that the lower we go down all these things, the more time one has to spend doing other things or doing these things as well. Okay, I see Lee with 565, and I see Leia with 366. Okay, interesting, interesting. I like the variety of answers. I like it. I like it. Okay, I think we will jump to the next activity, or sorry, not the next activity, the next section of the activity. But before that, I see Kirsten with 555, acknowledging the challenges of small town transit. I agree. I agree. Thank you all for your answers. Oh, wait, I saw another answer. I missed it. I'm so sorry. The long commuting, I personally haven't had to experience, but I've had other family members who have, and I've seen the drain and the toll that it can have as well. And food bank stigma as well is another factor that does come to play in to feelings and other factors within the budgeting. With that, we are going to make everything more complicated. And I am plucking away one of your coins to give to period products because Mrs. Martinez's child got their period, which means now Mrs. Martinez has to allocate a coin for their period supplies. And in our super fancy simple economy, these are super fancy period products that cost one full coin out of 15. So now you only have 14 coins. So how will you reallocate your budget to make it work. And I will give you all, I guess, another 2 minutes to think on it, and then I'll come back and we can chat about it some more.
I'll jump in again while we wait for the comments. I know it takes longer to type than to talk. Um, I'm going with three for food. I'm gonna go with six for housing and then still take public transport. I feel like the shorter commute would allow for more time for things. Also, if I have to rely on the food bank for some meals, I want to factor in like the time it takes if I'm going to line up. And then one thing I'm thinking about also with the food bank is will they have everything I need? So those are just some of the thoughts that I had during the process.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I see someone in the chat with truly with all options impact the food budget, which is awful. And usually the first thing families compromise. 100%. So their updated answer would be 365. I personally think it's pretty interesting that even though one may need to rely on the food bank, with the way our activity is set up, that now means they can get a new house or share a car, which feels kind of dystopian. And it's almost like we set it up that way on purpose. Did anyone else have any thoughts or feelings regarding the activity? Okay, I will take that. Oh, I see another message. Heartbreaking, yeah. Started to think about other means of accessing products. 100%. Unfortunately, where we are at right now, it seems to be quite rare to have free products anywhere, whether that be in public schools, in community centers, etc. And I know there's definitely been like it's been a fight to try and get period products in schools. Um, but we are seeing kind of more community stuff as of recently, kind of all over the country, which has been really cool. So hopefully that continues to grow. But truly, this activity was meant to kind of force everyone's hand into making these really difficult decisions, so we could touch on how period poverty does look in real life because we can talk about it a lot on an advocacy level, but activities like this really help us put into perspective how it can compound with other things such as poverty or being queer or being trans, etc., or living in a small town, in a rural area, in a remote community, etc. So we are glad that you all participated in this activity. But with that, I will pause my share again. Okay, in BC, it's part of public school policies to provide products, but unsure what it looks like for equitable access. Okay, gotcha, gotcha. That's very cool and interesting to know. I'm personally only very much on top of like the Ontario stuff and like the Quebec stuff, but very interesting. Thank you for sharing. Um,
I can
okay,
speak
and
to
with that,
that a little
yeah.
bit. Um, yeah, so like I think it was, I can't remember the year it was mandated to have products in all public schools. But I think there's often a gap between the policies and then the implementation of the policies. So I think a lot of the schools, if they do provide it, it's questions around like, are they restocking? What kind of products do they have? Do students know how to use the products? Has the school addressed menstrual stigma so that students feel comfortable using the products and accessing them? So um, often like the policies what like it's a great step in the right direction, but there needs to be a little bit more of that like systemic work to make these policies actually kind of be effective. But again, any kind of step forward is a step in the right direction. It's just all of these other questions that remain around it. So yeah, thank you so much for participating in that activity. It's definitely a frustrating one when you think about like, okay, I have this many coins and I only actually have one option for food now. So like Priya was saying, it takes, you know, takes you into this space where you're having to make a choice that's essentially been made for you. So we're going to shift gears a little bit now, and we're going to talk about how to make conversations around menstruation more relatable, especially when we're talking to youth, or people who just might not be as familiar with the menstrual space. One thing we found super helpful is using personal stories and experiences. And the idea here is to normalize the experience of menstruation and to change the narrative. So we've been using numbers and quotes, and those are really great on an advocacy level. But if we're speaking with younger folks, or again, people who might not know as much about menstruation, then there's a higher chance that you'll be able to connect with someone if there's more storytelling components to it. If you're comfortable, we love when people speak really openly and honestly about their own experiences. And then at the same time, really validating experiences that are different, because menstruation is a very diverse and unique experience from person to person. So, menstrual symptoms are something that are unique for each person. And when we talk about menstrual health management, a lot of focus is generally placed on the bleeding aspect of menstruation. So, for example, if we're talking about someone missing activities, class, maybe work, a lot of attention is placed on not having access to pads or tampons or any kind of period product that manages bleeding. And that's true in many cases. However, people might also be missing activities because they're experiencing cramps or other symptoms of menstruation. So there's some examples on the screen there for you. It's really essential to look at the entire menstrual cycle and to consider all the different phases, and that one might have different needs or different wants in relation to products or care, depending on where they're at in their monthly cycle. So, just as each individual experiences symptoms differently, these symptoms can even look different in just one person, depending on the phase that they're in their cycle. So, another myth you might have heard is that each phase of the cycle lasts exactly 1 week. So, not only is this not true for everyone, but some of the phases also overlap, as you can see on your screen here. Sometimes that's the debate between 3 or 4 phases. For the purposes of this, we're going with four. Um, but yeah, so generally people associate symptoms like cramps with the menstruation phase, so when you're actually bleeding. But many people also experience cramps, sometimes even more extremely during the ovulation phase. So understanding the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle can really help us to make decisions about how we're managing our menstrual health. Um, for example, I'm quite an active person. I like to play sports. And within the past couple of years doing more menstrual equity work, I found out that the follicular phase is generally associated with higher energy levels, and the menstruation phase is generally associated with lower energy levels. And that's actually really helped me to plan my self-care routine and give myself a little bit more kindness and being a little bit more gentle with myself, just knowing a little bit more about my cycle and knowing about the phases and what that might entail. Just waiting for the slide to change. Yeah, perfect. So, for some folks, knowing the phases of the menstrual cycle is actually really essential in managing menstrual conditions. And these manifest as more than just PMS symptoms. So, while discomfort associated with your period is common, so, for example, light cramps. Extreme or debilitating pain is not normal and may be a sign that there's something else going on. Some menstrual conditions that we just wanted to bring to light, there's many, but these are just some of the ones we wanted to talk about. So, endometriosis, which is a disease in which endometrial-like tissue grows outside of your uterus. This is associated with lots of chronic pain and can impact other aspects of your life as well and your body, as it does affect the whole body. PMDD, or premenstrual dysphoric disorder. This is severe PMS symptoms. So it's not just like, ooh, I'm a little grumpy. There's like a small mood swing here or there. This is things like severe depression or big mood changes or mood swings that leave you unable to participate in your daily activities or disrupts your life in some way. And then dysmenorrhea is severe or debilitating cramping. So this is cramping that It's not light cramping. This is the type of cramping that keeps you in bed or um, prohibits you from doing any of your daily activities. There's, again, other conditions that impact some people with periods as well, but we just wanted to highlight these. So, in understanding the symptoms, phases, and conditions associated with periods, it can help us choose the best period products that work best for ourselves. So sometimes, for example, when I was talking about the public school policies to put period products in schools. Um, it's sometimes not super obvious or clear to people who are getting their first period or something like that about which products might be best for them. So, this table is something just to consider when people are asking questions around it or deciding between the different types of products available because there are many. An example is that we all know reusables are really great, but if someone doesn't have access to consistent wash facilities, it's likely just not an option that will work for that person. And then in December 2023, a change, this is similar to the school comment, but a change to the Canada Labor Code stated that free menstrual products must be available for employees in federally regulated workplaces. Again, a step forward. But there's still issues around the types of menstrual products available in these scenarios and questions around why it's only applying to federally regulated spaces. This actually addresses the BC schools one directly, but as of 2019, BC schools have been required to have menstrual products available for any students who need them. And like I kind of mentioned before, this is great, but there's questions around how accessible these products are and what types of products are actually available. So, just being mindful of the different choices based on certain circumstances is essential. And the most empowering thing that we can do is to provide all the options available for the management of menstruation itself, as well as the management of like physical and emotional manifestations of the menstrual cycle. So, what I'd love to do now is just apply some of what we learned to real life scenarios. I'll give everyone like a few minutes to think about perhaps something that you've encountered. Could be at work, could be in your personal life, could be in the community. Anything that has come up during this presentation that we might be able to kind of address together. And if you want to drop it in the chat, I'll pick like one or two that we can kind of speak to, and people can unmute and join in on the conversation if they want to. Awesome. So I'm seeing some comments in the chat. I'll just chit chat until more come along. So this person has said, I went to a rec center the other day and saw free products in the women's bathroom. I was honestly so shocked to see that they were free, as it's obviously not the standard. Very happy to see that though. Progress. This was in Maple Ridge, BC. That's amazing. I love to see it. Free products are just so great and so necessary. Um, there's so many times where it feels like things are being kind of like um, monitored. So like even with free products, it's like, oh, take one, whatever. So it's really nice to see just the availability of these products in a place that many people would frequent. So I love that. That's very exciting. I'd be really curious to know if they offer them in like the men's bathroom or if there's any gender neutral bathrooms there, if they offer them there as well. But yeah, loving the progress and hoping that it just continues upward. Priya, I don't know if you wanted to discuss a different kind of scenario that has come up um, in any of our other presentations that might be helpful to discuss. I know we've had some students at our local high school have expressed that they have not been permitted to use the washrooms during class time. I feel like that is a huge one for many students. I remember like when I was in high school being like monitored in that way. Um, Priya, I don't know if you want to speak to this because I've been speaking for a long time, but I'm more than happy to comment if not.
Why don't you go first and I can jump in after?
Perfect. So yeah, thanks for bringing up this scenario. I think a lot of this kind of monitoring has a lot to do with how we see students, and how we kind of approach relationships with students as like educators or as youth service providers or anyone in this kind of authoritative position. And a lot of that has to do again with like open conversations and trying to change the narrative around menstruation and the fact that people need to use the washroom at sometimes that might be inconvenient timing for them. But I think for the person who's experiencing it, it's definitely more inconvenient for them than it is for that person disallowing them to use the washroom. So I think having those conversations with like staff or other teachers at the school is a really important place to start, um, explaining that like these relationships that we build with students when there is mutual respect, like students will also respect the person who is quote unquote in that authoritative position. And yeah, there needs to be like reciprocity in that relationship. Because this is something we see all the time, and it has a lot to do with how our society is set up and sees youth. Priya, did you want to add anything?
I did. From what you were saying, it sort of, I don't know, inspired me. But like it very much is giving people don't take menstruation seriously, and people don't take people who menstruate seriously in tandem with that. So like what Quisan was saying, where this is very just a reflection of how current society is set up, very that, very that. And we're seeing a lot of patterns in schools, for example, that are reflected in society as a whole, especially as of late. Um, and yeah, those were my comments. Not as much to say, but small thought.
Yeah, so there's a comment in here. I agree 100%. We're making lots of progress, but there's always situations that crop up. 100%. Um, yeah, that is the reality, and that is exactly what we're trying to change is we're trying to make progress into this long-term systemic change. So that actually is a really nice segue into the next part of our presentation. So thanks for engaging in that. Someone's just commenting, when that happened to me in high school, I just told my teacher that's because I had my period. However, not everyone is comfortable doing that. But he definitely thought twice before saying no the next time. Yeah, 100%. Speaking openly, we love to see it. That's great. So yeah, the exercise we just went through, again, just said it, but it really demonstrates the importance of speaking openly about menstruation. And this goes for with youth and even with our peers and colleagues. And as we plan to do so, Espot brought up literally such a great point. We really want to encourage people to invite non-menstruators into the conversation as well. So in our experience, like in the advocacy space, in the menstrual advocacy space, one of the reasons that menstrual inaccessibility and inequity issues have been around for so long, is that a lot of people with the ability to make those big decisions or make those policy decisions are people who don't have to think about periods. So cis men are often in these positions of power and decision-making power. So in their world, menstruation was never a challenge to begin with, and this is why it was never solved. This is also why society is not set up for these things. For example, infrastructure, um, not a lot of like private places to change a reusable cup, for example. So the majority of the time, when we do have the chance to sit down with non-menstruators, and when we have the chance to have an open discussion, there's a lot of compassion and understanding. But that being said, before we actually speak to them, there's also a lot of assumptions. Something that comes up a lot is that they don't feel that it's their problem. And then many of them don't feel like it's their place to make those decisions. And in reality, there's many different ways that we can center menstruators in these decision-making processes. So not really an excuse, decision makers. So that's why we are trying to encourage non-menstruators to join in on these conversations. We want to center menstruators in these decisions that are being made about menstruating bodies. Um, and we just really encourage people to, in their own individual practices or even on a wider scale, to make conversations like this more accessible to people who don't menstruate. So, again, we've identified that bringing in non-menstruators to the conversation about menstruation is really essential in our efforts to achieve menstrual equity. And I just wanted to share some of the other actionable items. These are just possible actionable items, and you can share them with your youth, practice them yourselves, or, encourage colleagues to get more involved as well. I think that our follow-up information has this, but feel free to also just jot them down if you see something that totally sparks your interest. But these are smaller scale things that you can do that will actually have a very big change long term. So changing mental models is huge. And I'll also leave you with a question of, in your own practice, which of these calls to action or which other calls to action can you implement within your work or within your community? And then what are some that you want to like dream of? And like, no dream is too big. Just kind of keep those in your thoughts as you create more space for menstrual equity advocacy in your life. But yeah, that concludes our presentation today. I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know it's not easy to have like a longer day than you need to, but I'm super happy you could all join us. And if there are any last minute questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute. But otherwise, you will be getting a follow-up email from us with some resources and materials. And feel free to reach out at any point if you have any more questions for us.